And then there were two spots, that is, left to decide for the upcoming NFL draft as you take a look at the updated first-round draft order for the 2024 season. Now, we know the Lions will pick 29th and the Ravens will pick 30th after both teams lost in the conference championship yesterday. So that means it's time to start thinking about the future in Baltimore and in Detroit. Let me welcome you back in. Tommy Tran, Haley Sutton. We've got Brady, Quinn, and Douzable. We're going to talk about the future for these two programs. Now, we'll start with the Ravens. And Lige, I'll go to you first on this one. Yeah. In terms of the draft, I think they've done pretty well over the last couple of years in adding some key pieces. Kyle Hamilton is the guy that jumps out to me initially. But we were talking in the break about needs for the Ravens. So let's break that down. In terms of the draft, where should the Ravens be focusing? I mean,
you can look at outside linebacker because if you look at it, Kyle Van Noy is older. He's going to be free. Jadeveon Clowney is going to be free as well. But I think a positional need is offensive tackle and corner more important than outside linebacker, especially depends on if Mike McDonald stays or not, because he's so great with scheming up simulated pressure and actually bringing pressure. There isn't a high emphasis on a guy on the outside getting 9 or 10 sacks, even though they had that this year, Brady. So I look at offensive tackle because Ronnie Stanley stays hurt all the time. Morgan Moses is getting up there in age. I think you need a offensive tackle to come in to solidify the young offensive tackle. Now, they did take Daniel Faalele a few years ago, and I thought that he would jump into that role. Just hasn't been able to get into the starting rotation. And then if you look at the cornerback position, Marlon Humphrey has really struggled to stay healthy these last few years, Brady. And then Ronald Darby will be free. Brandon Stevens has one more year on that contract. So I think those are two positional needs, offensive tackle and corner. They can look at that.
Yeah, this is a spot where you're going to take best player available, probably at a number of spots. But you think about the offensive line, you got to have depth there as we take a look at maybe what Ryan Wilson is thinking. So Chop Robinson could make some sense from a scheme standpoint. He fits what they're typically looking for out of an edge rusher. Odafe Owe, also for Penn State, you know, kind of falls in line there. A.D. Mitchell at wide receiver would be an interesting one. I mean, we saw them take a big swing at the wide receiver position this offseason. Obviously, if Todd Monken's going to continue to be your offensive coordinator, that's what he likes to do, to a fault in the AFC Championship game. They threw out all these wide receivers and 11 personnel out there. I'm not sure their offense is quite there yet, but you can make some sense for A.D. Mitchell, given the fact that some of the veteran wide receivers could be transitioning out. The quarterback position is one that I think, like, everyone, you need depth there. They've got some aging players there as well. That would be one where I think at that point in time in the first round of the draft, you could probably find a pretty solid cornerback who could come in and start for you right away, opposite of Marlon Humphrey.
So if those are sort of the targets for the draft, they also, during this offseason, Lige, you're going to have to deal with some notable free agents. And if you take a look, some big names like OBJ and Jadeveon Clowney. And that running back position, they've been trying to get it done. They've had a lot of injuries, including J.K. Dobbins week 1.
Yeah, the biggest name on there, Brady, to me, is Justin Madubuike. Like, they got to figure out a way to get this guy back on the Ravens team. I mean, he was a nightmare for Patrick Mahomes in that offense the second half. Was an all-pro this year. I think he's just now tapping in to the player he's going to be. So I know they're going to have about $11 million in cap space. They got to figure some things out, maybe restructure a few guys. That's a guy, Tommy, that they have to bring in. You can't let a guy with that type of talent like Justin Madubuike walk out, because, Brady, you know this, pass rushing defensive tackles, they're just not out there, right? You're not just going to find guys like that. So Justin Madubuike is a guy that I think they need to do some business with. Everybody else in there, you talked about the running back room, Gus Edwards. I would not be surprised he signs another one-year deal. Same thing with Justice Hill.
Yeah, well, and you can find those guys in the draft too, right? J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, both guys you could look at in that way. The one that stuck out to me was Zeitler. You know, I think also at the 30th, pick, that portion of the draft, you're probably going to get a quality interior offensive lineman too that can help you out with this offensive line. We know how important it is to run the football. Again, maybe not so much in the AFC Championship game. That's more on Todd Monken. But moving forward, I do think that's still the base of their game plan, and that's another spot that you might be able to accomplish if you don't get it, in free agency. You potentially could in the draft as well. But replacing Zeitler is going to be huge, at least in my opinion, up on the offensive line.
Okay, so you guys both differ in terms of what that list was like, in terms of what stood out to you. If we get to the Lions now and their draft situation, now that they're back in our crosshairs, our guy Ryan Wilson thinks the secondary and then maybe reinforcing the offensive line. Brady, you're taking a look at maybe potentially Kool-Aid McKinstry and Graham Barton here with those two position groups.
McKinstry makes a ton of sense. I mean, obviously their secondary has struggled to be able to match ups, giving up big plays this year. So I'm sure Aaron Glenn would love to be able to bolster, that portion of the roster and change up some of the scheme that they were, able to showcase. But cornerback makes some sense. Offensive line, I don't know. know, I mean, it depends. Obviously, this is a group that loves to use extra offensive linemen, but that's really more because Ben Johnson is their play caller. So unless they replace someone who's going to have this, a similar thought to that, yes, you need depth there. That's part of it. But I would be curious to see if they went with a tackle, more a guard on the offensive line. I would say interior players more of a need to me. So unless you want to move Barton down inside, and that's more of the move there, that would make some sense. But this is also a group that I think, look, they're good at running back, they're good at wide receiver, they're good at tight end. They've done a tremendous job building up this roster. To me, I think also you could look at edge. Looking for someone opposite of Aiden Hutchinson to have more, consistency at that spot.
That was my number one thing. I think they need an edge defender opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. I mean, James Houston was supposed to be the guy who was banged up this year, but he was able to bring some pressure off the edge last year. So I think they need to address that. Talking about Kool-Aid McKinstry, he would fit Aaron Glenn's system perfectly because we know Aaron Glenn wants to play man coverage. That's what Kool-Aid McKinstry does really well. So that makes a lot of sense. When you talk about Barton from Duke, he's probably the only player in this draft that can play all 5 positions on the offensive line. So I can see them. I think Jonah Jackson, if I'm not mistaken, is a free agent after this year. So I can see them potentially sliding them in there. But I think corner and defensive end is the most important things for this Lions team. We just had a segment talking about how poor that defense has played down the stretch. They really struggled against the pass in the secondary. Cam Sutton has struggled. Emmanuel Mosley hasn't been able to be healthy and come back. I think Kool-Aid McKinstry makes a lot of sense. But also, I would not be surprised if they double down to get an edge guy not too long after the first round.
I don't know that McKinstry's going to be there.
Yeah.
He's probably going to be gone.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to say. It's interesting, too, when you think about Detroit pulling from the Alabama trail there. They had Brian Branch last year, and then, of course, the wide receiver, the running back with Jahmyr Gibbs. So it's becoming the new Bama up there in Detroit. Let's talk free agency, though. One of the guys on this list at the bottom there, Josh Reynolds, the wide receiver with a key drop yesterday, Brady, in the game. He is obviously a free agent going into this one. So when it comes to the Lions, if you're addressing what we're addressing in the draft, how do you then attack free agency with maybe some of these guys on the list?
Well, first thing is you can see there's definitely some pieces on defense that they're going to be missing. The edge is first that comes to mind with Akwara and Harris now not being a part of it, but also Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. When he played at times, he was able to step up, play well for this team. But we keep talking about the secondary. It's a big-time need. And wide receiver, I think they've been able to draft and develop for the most part pretty well. Yep. Josh Reynolds, too, might be the type of player that loves what they're building there in Detroit and wants to sign back, maybe more of a team-friendly deal. But, again, we talk about the drop. He also had some big catches throughout the course of the postseason, too, for them this year. So, clearly, wide receiver might be something they want to address in free agency. But, in particular, to me, it's going to be the secondary and edge rusher, depending on what kind of value they find there.
To me, it's going to be them signing their own players. Let's not forget, Penei Sewell's up for a deal right now, and the Sun God, Amon-Ra St. Brown. So those are two guys that are going to get top-tier money. So I know we're talking about free agency, but when you have a team like this, Brady, you want to keep some of your homegrown players. So most importantly, they need to do deals with Penei Sewell and the Sun God because those are foundational pieces for this team.
I like that we're just calling him the Sun God. Like, that's just casual. I love that. Let's get a deal done with the Sun God. Brady and Lee joining us, giving us a little off-season outlook as we inch closer to the NFL draft. You can stay up to date with all things draft by tapping into the First Pick podcast with Ryan Wilson and our guy Rick Spielman back on the podcast in the latest episode as the guys break down the Senior Bowl and the important guys and the information they get from that game. So be sure to scan that QR code, or you can listen in wherever you get your podcasts.